In this video, I will show you how to handle player inventory in Roblox Studio. It can be health and mana potions like in this example, or weapons, bullets, food, you name it. It would help out the channel a lot for more game development videos if you like, comment and consider subscribing. Let's begin. I am creating a new project with the base plate template. I am gonna save it to Roblox. Let's name it Inventory. First, let's set up our UI elements. Under Starter GUI, I'll create a Screen GUI. Let's rename it to Inventory GUI. Under that, I'll create a frame. I rename it to Main Frame. Under that, add a UI aspect ratio constraint because I wanted to maintain its aspect ratio. I'll select Scale with parent size for the aspect type. I want height as the dominant axis. And I want 2 for the aspect ratio because in this example, I'll use 2 inventory items. If you have more, you can adjust these values accordingly. Let's click on Main Frame. Change its anchor point to 0.5 so that its position is measured from its center. I find that it makes positioning easier. Set the position scales as 0.5 and 0.9 in X and Y, no offsets. It is now centered on the screen on the lower side. For the size, X is not relevant because I selected height as the dominant axis in the UI aspect ratio constraint. For Y scale, I'll use 0.15, no offset. This will specify the size of the slots that will hold items in our inventory. Let's create a UI list layout under Main Frame. Select that, set fill direction as horizontal because I want the list to be filled horizontally. And set horizontal alignment as center so that it is centered. Also, for vertical alignment, I'll select center. I'll create another frame to hold an inventory item. Later, we'll duplicate that. I'll rename it as Inventory Template. Under that, I'll create another UI aspect ratio constraint. Aspect ratio will be 1. Aspect type will be scale with parent size and dominant axis will be height. I select Inventory Template to set its size. X is irrelevant again. For Y scale, I'll use 0.9 which leaves out some narrow empty space on the top and the bottom. Next, I'll add an image button. I want it to work as a button because we are gonna select it to use or activate items. I'll rename it to image and set its size scales to 1 in X and Y with no offsets, so it fills up all the space of its parent. Next, I'll add a text label. It will show how many of an item we have. Let's rename it as count and set its size scales as 1 for X and 0.4 for Y. I want it roughly centered horizontally and vertically, so let's set the position scales to 0 and 0.4 in X and Y. I'll enable text scale so that the text fills up all the space as well. I'll change its text color to some kind of orange. I'll set text stroke transparency to 0 so there's a visible stroke around the text. Stroke with colors of high contrast as compared to the fill color helps with the visibility of the text over different colors. So this will be our inventory template. Oh, there's a typo here, let's fix that. And if we duplicate this, we can see that 2 of them fits nicely in a row, but a bit tightly packed. It would be better if we have some space between them. For this, we can use padding. I hit the list layout, expand padding. For scale, I type 0.025. Now we have some nice spacing between the 2 inventory items. We can now delete the second one. We'll duplicate the template with script later. I am selecting all of the UI elements and set background transparency to 1 and border size pixel to 0. I don't want any borders or backgrounds for the UI elements. I'll use my own icons as background. I'll put this inventory template under replicated storage. Replicated storage is a container service for objects that are available to both the server and connected game clients. This is a storage space that will be replicated for all clients, and I want to store the template here to clone as needed. I think we are done with the UI elements setup. Let's begin scripting. Under Inventory GUI, I'll create a local script and rename it to Inventory GUI. Here, I'll get a reference to my main frame. So local main frame is equal to script.parent.mainframe. I also want a reference to my inventory template. It will be local inventory template equals game.replicatedStorage wait for child inventory template. Since we are in a local script, we should use wait for child to make sure that items are fully loaded before trying to access them. I'll use 2 inventory items. Let's create a table for them. Local inventory equals curly brackets to specify table. The first element will be named health potion. It will be 0 at the start. The second one will be mana potion. It will also be 0. Let's assign images to these. I hit View, Asset Manager, and I'll import two images, health icon and mana icon. You can see that they are added here. I'll create a variable, local images equals to table. For health potion, it's gonna be, I need the asset ID for that. I can right click on the asset and select copy ID to clipboard, then come here and paste it. Let's do the same for mana potion. We need a comma here. We need to update inventory during the game, so let's create a function here for that. Local function update inventory. Here we'll create new UI items for inventory. We'll check from our inventory, so for every item in our inventory table, K and V in pairs inventory. If V is greater than 0, meaning that if we have more than 0 of any of the inventory items, then we are gonna create a new inventory item. And it will be a clone of the inventory template. As you remember, our template was empty, so we need to fill it in accordingly. Let's start with the name of the item. New inventory item.name will be K, the key value. I'll change its image, so new inventory item.image.image will be images K. If it's a health potion, we'll put the image of the health potion. If it's mana, we'll use the image of the mana potion. You may be thinking, what's up with this image.image? We have an image button here. The first .image corresponds to that. And we want to change its image property. The second .image corresponds to that. Let's update text now to show the count. New inventory item.count.text. Count is our text label here, and we want to change its text property. Is equal to V, which is the number of items we have. And we want to set its parent to make it visible. So new inventory item.parent will be mainframe. Of course, we need to call this function as well. Let's do it here for now. Later we'll make it better and call the function whenever there's a change in the inventory. And we have created a basic inventory system. Let's play and see how it looks currently. We don't see any inventory because we set both to 0 and we are checking if it is greater than 0 to show them. So let's use some values that are greater than 0 here. There we are with our inventory items. So far we have covered how to create UI elements for inventory items. But we won't need to create them all the time. If the player has more than 0 of them, they will be there already. Hence, we need to keep track of the created UI items. Let's create another table for that. Let's call it inventory item UI. This will hold the created inventory UI items. We should add this to the table, so inventory item UI K will be new inventory item. Let's also tie the creation to a condition. If inventory item UI for that key value, then I'll change inventory item UI K.count.text and it will be V. So if we already have that inventory UI item, we can increase the count value. Else, we should create it by using the code we wrote. This is how we can update the inventory. But sometimes it will be 0 if the player uses all their items. So we should cover for that as well. If V is 0, we should destroy that inventory item. Let's add an else here. Let me copy this and paste. The else block corresponds to V not being greater than 0. And if there's a UI item for that, I'm gonna destroy that. I'll also set it to nil because we don't have a UI item for that now. This should be end. This covers the case of inventory items with a count of 0. Now we have our UI buttons for inventory items set up, but we need some functionality. We need the inventory item to do something to or for the player. Let's handle that now. I'll create a local functions table, similar to the images table. And I'll create a health potion. We need to use the same names in both tables for this to work. This will be a function and it will be called whenever a health potion button is clicked, meaning a health potion is used. For now, I'll type print health potion used to print some outputs to see if they are working. But later we'll make it more game-like, I promise. Similarly, for mana potion, I'll add mana potion used. We'll call these functions somewhere in here because we are setting the image here. I can create new inventory item.image. We just changed the image value in line 31 above. Now I'll get the activated event and I'll connect to that with a function. Inside, I'll call the functions index k. This is a function, so we need to open and close parentheses. After invoking that function, we should decrease the remaining inventory count. Inventory k plus equals -1. We need to update the inventory again, so I'm gonna call update inventory. Every time a button is clicked, we'll call the relevant function in our functions table. It will decrease inventory and call the update inventory function so that the change is reflected on the UI. We need some mechanism to increase our inventory instead of changing these values in the script. We can use some 3D models that represent health and mana potions scattered around the environment. The player would collect them to increase their inventory. I have created two simple vial models in Maya. To import, I go to View, Asset Manager and import these FBX models. I'll select Import File as single mesh. I don't need separate mesh components for this use case. Now we have the models here. Let's go back to the game editor and add the health potion model. It will be in the workspace and let's put it somewhere like here. Under that, I'll create a string value that will represent item type. For the value, I'll type health potion. We'll be able to understand the type of the item by accessing item type and looking at the value of that. I'll also create a script, rename it to item. Let's have a reference to the health potion model first. Local item is equal to script.parent. Local item type is item.itemType that we have just created. Here I want to detect when the player touches the model to collect it. So I type item.touched event and I'll connect to that event with a function. And I'll type other part which is automatically filled out. Inside I'll type local model is equal to other part find first ancestor of class model. So we are checking if the object that touched the potion model has a model. If there's a model and if that model has a humanoid, so find first child which is a humanoid, this means that the colliding object is a player. And inside, meaning that the player has touched, I'll destroy the touched potion model. But before that, I need to let the player know that they have touched that item, so that their inventory gets increased. For that, I'll create a remote event. Remote events enable one-way communication between client and server. They are typically used for sending information. So I create one under replicated storage and name it item collected. I want this event to be called whenever an item is touched by a player. So here I'll create a reference to that event. Local item collected event equals to game.replicatedStorage.itemCollected. And I'll fire that event before destroying the item. Item collected event, fire client. Which player will it be fired for? To find it, I'll use the player's service. Player's service contains player objects for presently connected clients to a Roblox game server. So local player service equals to game get service players. So inside the fire client function, here we can pass in get player from character. And the character corresponds to the model here. So I can give the service the model and it will give me the player. And the event will be fired for that player as the client. I'll also pass in item type.value. I'll get the value of that item so that we'll distinguish if it was a mana potion or a health potion. This is how we are gonna let the inventory GUI know that the player has collected an inventory item. I'll go back to the inventory GUI script. Here, I'll create a reference to the item collected event. Local item collected event, just like how we did before. Game.replicatedStorage, wait for child, item collected. Since this is a local script, we are using wait for child to get an object from the server side. And here at the bottom, I'll type item collected event.onClient event. I'll connect to that event with a function called increment inventory. Let's create that function here. Local function increment inventory. I'll have underscore item type as the parameter. We send the item type here, so we'll know what the type of the item is. Inside, I'll type inventory with the index underscore item type. It will be based on the item type, and I'll increment the value by 1. I have just updated the inventory count, so I need to call the update inventory function. Let's cut it from here. I don't need to call it here anymore and paste it here. At the start, the inventory counts will be 0, so there won't be any existing inventory UI items. Once one of them is incremented, I'll call the update inventory function. Let's go back to the game editor. I want to disable CanCollide and enable anchored on the potion model so that it won't block the player and it won't fall down when the game starts. I'll now duplicate this mesh and position them around. I want some mana potions as well. Let's add the mana potion mesh to the game. I'll do the same thing for that. I'll add a string value, rename as item type, and the value will be mana potion. We have to be consistent with the names. This name will be used for indexing a table, so there shouldn't be any typos in these. I'll use the same script. I duplicate the item script and add inside the mana mesh as well. I disable can collide and enable anchored for the mana portion as well. Let's duplicate this and scatter around. We can play and see how it works. Let's collect one now. I have one mana potion in my inventory. One health potion. 2 mana, 2 health, 3 mana, 4 mana, and so on. So you can see that the item count in the UI increases as we collect items. And we created printouts for when we click the UI items, so let's click on the health potion icon. It says health potion used. If I click on mana, it says mana potion used. And the count gets decreased as well. If I use all of my health potions, the UI element disappears. In the final part of this video, we'll create some functionality for when we use the potions other than printing out text. Let's create a health and mana bar, and we can increase health and mana indicators in those bars when the player uses an item. In Starter GUI, I'll create another screen GUI. I'll rename it as Health Bar. Under that, I'll create a frame. I'll call it Main Frame to represent the uppermost frame in this UI element. This will hold 2 stacked bars. I'll change its anchor point to 0.5 so that it is anchored at the center. And I'll set the position scale to 0.5 for X to center it horizontally, and 0.03 for Y to have it on the upper side vertically. I'll change its size scale to 0.3 in X, quite long, but for Y it will be 0.05, so very narrow in height. Let's close this asset manager to see the game view a bit better. I'll create another frame under the main frame. Let's rename it to Health Frame. Let's adjust its size scales as 1 and 0.5 in X and Y so it fills up all the space horizontally but half the space vertically because we'll have another bar for mana. For background color, let's use some kind of red to represent bad health. Under that, I'll create yet another frame called Health. This will represent the health value. This will fill all the space of its parent, so the size scales will be 1 for X and Y with no offsets. Its background color will be green to represent good health. We'll change the size scale in X with script. Let me show you manually first. Let's make it 0.5. It represents half health. 0.25 for quarter health and so on. I'll create the mana bar similarly. Create a frame. Rename as mana frame. Set size scales as 1 and 0.5 for X and Y. I want it on the bottom half, so I set the position scale for the Y-axis as 0.5 for this one. I create another frame to represent the mana value. Again, the size scales will be 1 for X and Y with no offsets. And the background color will be blue. Let's rename it as mana. Again, the size scale in X will visualize the percentage of mana that we have. Now I need to write the scripts to update these in real time. Under Health Bar, I'll create a local script and rename it as Health Bar. Here, I'll get a reference to the mainframe in this UI element like we always do. Local mainframe equals to script.parent.mainframe. Then I want to get references to the health and mana frames. Local health UI is equal to mainframe.healthframe.health. Local mana UI is equal to mainframe.manaframe.mana. As I said, we'll change their size scale values. So let's create some initial values for these. Local health is equal to 20 and local mana is equal to 10. I'll start with 20% health and 10% mana to give the player some incentive to collect the potions around. You can adjust these as needed. Now let's create a function for updating the size scale. Local function update UI. Inside health UI.size will be udim2.new. udim2 is a coordinate used in user interfaces. For the X scale, we'll have the health divided by 100. Offset will be 0. Y scale will be 1 and Y offset will be 0. And very similarly for the mana, I'll use mana instead of health. I'll call update UI here so that the bars are updated at the beginning. If I press play, we can see that health is at 20% and mana is at 10%. Now we need to change these values when we use the items. Let's use an event for that. I'll create the event under Starter GUI since these are all local scripts. I create a bindable event here and rename it as item used. Bindable events allow for one-way communication between client-client or server-server scripts. Here, I'll create another variable local item used event. It will be mainframe. So we are in the health bar script here. The mainframe is this one. So the parent's parent will be the starter GUI. Hence I type parent.parent and then colon wait for child item used to get the bindable event that we have just created. Here at the end, I'll use the item used event, and to get the event, I should use .event. I'll connect to that event with a function. The parameter will be underscore item type. We'll know what the item type is. Based on the item type, if underscore item type is health potion, then let's increase health by 20. If it is mana potion, let's increase mana by 20. We should call the update UI function again to reflect the changes on the UI. To fire the event, we'll use the inventory GUI script. Local item used event is equal to, for the inventory GUI script, the parent's parent will have the item used event. So mainframe.parent.parent colon wait for child item used. And we are gonna fire that event when we click a UI button. So instead of these print lines, I'll type item used event and I'll fire it with the name health potion. And very similarly, I'll now fire that event with mana potion information. Let's play and see how it works. I have no inventory at the beginning. Let's collect a mana potion. 2 mana, 2 health potions. If I press the button to use a health potion, you can see that my health gets increased on the health bar. Also, we can use mana potions and our mana gets increased in our mana bar. There we have it, a functional inventory system in Roblox Studio. If you have made it this far, great job and thanks for sticking out. In the upcoming videos, I'll talk about server-side persistent inventory and marketplace. If you enjoyed the video, please like and consider subscribing to support the channel for more videos. Make sure to turn on your notification bells to get notified. If you want a new game development tutorial, let me know down in the comments. You can get access to the Roblox project file from Patreon. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.